that's all changing, and so is the cookie's fortune. Smart cookie blocking technology led by Apple's Intelligent Tracking Prevention, or ITP, and Firefox's Enhanced Tracking Protection, ETP, now block third-party cookies by default. And even Google's Chrome will soon get controls that let consumers block cookies. Last year, in January, Google announced that it intended to change the way ads are targeted online. Google's goal for making third-party cookies obsolete by 2022 brought about one of the most significant shifts for the online advertising industry, which relies on the technology to serve personalized content. Currently, approximately 30% of available impressions are rendered on browsers, mostly Safari and Firefox, with no third-party cookies. And as Chrome accounts for approximately 66% of the remaining browser usage, it is expected that this change will essentially end the use of third-party cookies, creating a whole new era, the next generation of digital advertising. So what does post third-party cookie era mean for marketeers, and what's the alternative solution? This is where IAB Europe steps in. In my role as chair of the Programmatic Trading Committee, it's my job to work with members to develop the annual work plan and help guide industry initiatives. Our focus for 2020 swiftly prioritized educating and guiding the industry stakeholders on how they can navigate the post third-party cookie era. Our first initiative was to bring members together to get their views on this new era and how we could navigate it within the tight 2-year timeframe given. We produced a guide in May 2020 to provide background on the current use of cookies in digital advertising and an overview of the alternative solutions being developed. A broad range of stakeholders contributed to the guide, including publishers like CNN, the BBC and Bloomberg, and other companies like Adform, The Trade Desk, Yieldbird, Xandr, Oracle, Kantar, and DoubleVerify. We also had input from the national IABs and IAB Tech Lab. The mission of the guide was to prepare brands, agencies, publishers, and tech intermediaries for the much anticipated post third-party cookie advertising ecosystem. We made it really clear to members that this was not to be used as a sales pitch for their new identity or contextual solutions, and all commercial interests were to be left at the door. The guide provides answers to the following questions. What factors have contributed to the depletion of the third-party cookie? How will the depletion of the third-party cookies impact stakeholders and the wider industry, including proprietary platforms, otherwise known as walled gardens? And how will the absence of third-party cookies affect the execution of digital advertising campaigns? What solutions currently exist to replace usage of third-party cookies, and what industries solutions are currently being developed by whom, and how can I, or you on the call, get involved in contributing the different solutions? When it got close to being nearly halfway through the transition period to when cookies will be obsolete, it was time to start updating the guide. And in Q4 2020, committee members began reviewing the content of the guide, updating it to align with what we know today. And to help us better understand how ready and prepared the market was, we also ran a poll alongside the writing of the guide. We asked what new opportunities and challenges stakeholders foresee and how prepared they are for these challenges. We also asked about the impact that they think it will have on targeting, measurement, verification, and overall investment. And we had over 100 industry professionals taking part, which revealed the following results. So the first question we looked at was the priority. We asked how much of a priority is finding an alternative to third-party cookies for your company, and nearly half of all respondents said it was critically important to find a solution, and only 13% cited that it wasn't very important. But controversially, whilst it's high priority or even critical, the majority are, of course, not prepared. There still isn't a clear solution, and this was evident by the open-ended questions and responses we received. Some asked whether ID solutions will be allowed in the future, and whether they are the next solutions to be blocked by browsers. Others said that the biggest challenge the industry has ever seen, and finding common ground and the way that works cross-domain, cross ad tech providers is very, very hard. And another common theme we heard was around measurement, and it's critical for advertisers to trust and therefore invest in digital. When asked the question, how do you expect your revenue or business to be impacted by the following of depletion of third-party cookies, the majority of respondents are expecting a drop in revenue. Findings show that the majority are looking at a number of solutions. First-party identity solutions scored very high, as contextual. And finally, we asked who they are looking to for guidance. And as you can see, they expect guidance from industry bodies, which brings me to, and finally, onto the updated edition of this guide. Launched in 2021, the updated guide provides the industry with information that we know today on the solutions being developed for post-third-party cookie era. It provides the most up-to-date answers and to the following questions. And to further help stakeholders navigate and prepare for the post-third-party cookie advertising era, additional key questions are also covered. What alternative solutions may be suitable for my business? How can my company get involved in contributing to the industry-wide solutions? And how can we identify ID solutions to test and work effectively with? The guide is available to download from IAB Europe's website within the Knowledge Hub. But now let's discuss the answer to questions added by the guide by speaking to some of the experts that contributed to it. And I believe all the panelists should be popping up on the screen now. I'll just give it a second. Fantastic. Just a couple more, I believe. See this as the virtual walk to the stage. You always have that kind of gap between the presenter and the people walking up on stage, taking their seats on the stools. I'm sure by the end of this year, we may have that experience again. I think we've got everyone on here, so fantastic. I think all the panelists are on now, and I would like to invite them all to introduce themselves and answer the first question as well. Since the first guide was released in May, what changes have we seen? And please, can each of you say the biggest development as outlined in the guide? So Jamie, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
All right. Hello, Jamie Penkethman, product marketing for identity for MediaMath. Really happy to be here. So the biggest change since the guide came out is the influx of first-party IDs. On the one hand, this is awesome. It validates the need for one-to-one marketing, but on the other hand, it creates a host of challenges and decisions that both brands and publishers need to make. And I think we'll speak a lot about that today.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Jamie. Carlotta, I'm just going to come to you next, if that's okay, with the same question.
Yeah, of course. Hey, everybody. Carlotta Zorzi here. I work on the Global Brand Partnerships team at Oracle Data Cloud. So in terms of changes, we definitely observed a renowned attention towards first-party cookies and the role that they will play when things like universal IDs and universal identifiers are sold. And there's been also an increased sense of urgency and curiosity about understanding what solutions there are, how they work, how they can provide value to advertisers whilst providing a good experience to consumers. And in terms of development, I'd say there's been an extension in clients' minds on how they approach targeting as a whole, from first-party to third-party cookies to context, as a way to really understand what's available and ensure that they are in the forefront of development.
Thank you very much, Carlotta. Richard.
Hi, Richard Nicholson. I'm head of marketplace development for EMEA at Index Exchange. I'd say the biggest change we've seen in the last 6 to 9 months has been the move from advertisers and publishers talking about identity and actually actioning against it. So on the publisher side, actually implementing solutions, and on the advertiser side, actually running test campaigns against persistent identifiers. So yeah, I'd say moving from that kind of scoping things out and talking about it to actually taking action.
Thank you very much, Richard. And Jacob.
Hi, I'm Jacob. I'm one of the co-founders in Adform. And to answer your question on the changes we've seen, I mean, first of all, I would say that the guide has become even better. I mean, that's good news. I think it has a lot of even stronger content And I have to applaud everybody who has contributed. It's a lot of people. And I would say, I mean, just as we heard from Richard, I think this extends beyond the guide. I mean, when you look at the news flashes, etc., out there, it sort of reflects also that now it's not just talk. It's actual real news that we start to hear about, you know, things happening rather than just talk. And I think some of the things I just wanted to mention was, for example, Pripyat taking over the common ID, or very recently the trade desk UID2 controls. I mean, that's real actions that really contribute, and I think that's really important.
Thank you very much, Jacob. And Garrett.
Hi there, Garrett McGrath. I'm part of the product team at Magnite. Jacob mostly stole my answer. I think the things that have been going on in pre-bid recently are very significant. You know, when you talk to people at Magnite, you're kind of half talking to pre-bid a lot of the time. And beyond that, a tremendous amount of time being spent in the W3C talking about privacy sandbox items, and a lot of proposals and counter proposals and questions about how that'll actually shake out in the new year. If January 2022 really is the date, we shall see.
Absolutely, and I think that leads me really nicely onto the next question, because in this new edition of the guide, the number of solutions for the third-party cookie has quadrupled. I have a couple of questions in this section, which is, what is your take on what the industry has developed over the last 6 months? And with that 2022 date in mind, are we close to having it all figured out by 2022? It's not an easy or straightforward question, but Jacob, I'm going to come to you first.
Thanks. I think on the positive side, and very importantly, I mean, we're starting to see really good adoption in the bitstream data in terms of how many first-party IDs are there, as I think it was Richard who mentioned. And I think it's more than quadrupled. So I mean, of course, there's a lot more IDs in the guide that's been talked about, but the growth has not come by you know, many more IDs. It comes from certain IDs, like the pre-bid ones, for example, that is really making, you know, this scale up. When we look into the bitstream, I think we see an average maybe 20% of all impressions having first-party IDs, and in some countries like Denmark, where I mean I'm located, and we did some early proof of concepts, I think it's a third of all the traffic, or even more, that has a first-party ID. So I think that's really promising, and considering especially that a lot of these impressions due to header bidding are sent out through multiple SSPs, of which some don't support first-party IDs, the adoption is maybe even higher when you look at the number of publishers doing this.
Fantastic. It's great to hear that you know, there's such adoption in Denmark, and it'll be interesting to see. I know we're going to come on to it, like the options for clients, publishers, and partners in all geos. Like, is it all going to have that kind of richness of penetration? But Garrett, I'm going to come to you on this question as well, which is, are we close to having it all figured out by 2022? And no. The developments over the last 6 months. Perfect. And to the next person, I'm joking. No, I leave this with you.
No, I don't think we have it all figured out. I think we have a pretty good view on where we're going, and it kind of breaks out into authenticated users, non-authenticated, first-party driven signals, privacy sandbox to the extent that we are subjected to that. I think we have a very strong view, at least we do at Magnite, in terms of where we need to go and the things that we need to build. I second or third the statement that this is the year of doing things. We are actively testing now. You know, I think the most interesting thing is the center of gravity of audience recognition and assembly is going to move from the buy side to the sell side, the publisher tools and publisher systems, and ultimately it's going to be a little rocky, and you know, we're going to have to adjust to those changing systems. But actually, I really ultimately think it's going to be a positive thing for our industry and the internet as a whole.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And Jamie, I know you've got a couple of thoughts on this, kind of these, well, both these questions.
Great. Yeah. So I think, look, we are definitely getting closer, but the key issues are supply and then fragmentation of IDs across publisher supply. Supply is increasing of IDs, but we have this market dynamic where supply drives demand and demand drives supply. So what that means is that Brands won't want to transact in on an ID until they see that there's scale on the supply side. Conversely, publishers won't want to integrate an ID until they see that brands are actually transacting it on that ID. So when there's an increase on one hand, then there will be a increase on the other. And then the other thing that we have is fragmentation. All these first-party IDs depend on integrations with publishers. So although there are solutions out to solve this fragmentation, it still means that each ID in the marketplace will have unique and slightly overlapping footprints. So solving for this fragmentation will be kind of the second stage of the challenge that needs to be solved.
Well, let's talk about the influx of IDs and solutions. How can stakeholders identify and select partners that are right for them? And Jamie, I'll stick with you on this one if that's okay.
Okay, so I think brands need to begin the evaluation process now, and that process is simpler or easier depending on how many IDs are available in a given region. So it's certainly more complex when there's more IDs available. The way we look at it is, I think the simple way to do it is to find kind of the intersection of what IDs are available at scale in a given region. What is your primary type of first-party data? Is it based on email address? Is it based on non-authenticated site visitors? Or is it based off of offline PII? And different IDs will have strengths in each of those types of first-party data. Then the third area is data services related to an ID. So on a simple level, this is your DMP integrated with a first-party ID you're looking at? And on a more complex level is, what other data services does that ID offer? Are you using that ID provider for measurement? Are you using the third-party data marketplace? Are you using them for segmentation of first-party data enrichment? And that's really, and then the intersection of that kind of leads you to your shortlist or choice of ID partner.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Garrett, is that something, you're on the other side of the intermediary fence, but you're dealing with publishers. Is that something, a similar approach you would advise?
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. I think one of the biggest problems we have right now is that third-party cookies still exist, which is a good thing. But figuring out where to point the ship from when they do not exist, they're not being fully adopted by DSPs today, because why would they be? And by that I mean universal IDs or first-party signals. But we all realize that either an authenticated version of a signal or a non-authenticated first-party version of a signal is our future. And I thought Jamie's answer was great. There are regional considerations. There are what sort of data is tied to the identifier, what sort of methods is the identifier using that may or may not be something you'd like them to do with your identifiers. There's many things to consider, but settling on kind of one of those two, or frankly both models, and getting the buy side and advertisers and brands understood and bought in, and getting the feedback loop to them that they need, so that they don't all go run to the walled gardens.
Yes, we want to fund the open internet for sure in that side
Exactly.
of things. And Richard, it feels there's a lot of collaboration needed by both sides of the fence. And I know you were talking about something similar on our prep call.
Yeah, exactly. I think Jamie and Garrett that gave answers like that's like absolutely what needs to happen in the marketplace. And I think where we look at the digital landscape over the past 10-15 years, it's been a lot of collaboration, although it doesn't always seem like it. There's a lot of collaboration between buyers, sellers, vendors, and I think that needs to continue, especially with this question. So we have large publishers, large buyers working together and exchanging information, ensuring that what is going to work for one side of the equation is going to work for the other as well, because there's no point in standing up a particular solution and then just hoping that the other side is going to adopt it and it's going to transact. So I think the level of collaboration, that's why calls like this are so great as well, is necessary to get us to the other side. So publishers and buyers, especially those key relationships that have held for the past 15 years or so, they're going to be key to us establishing the new normal.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Richard. And Jacob, you've got an opinion on this item as well, right?
Yeah, let me maybe focus on publishers and how they choose ID solutions. I think that's one of the most important things to get started on. A lot of publishers, or all big publishers, are working on this, but there's still many of them in a strategic decisioning phase, and they're finding it difficult to choose because there's more and more choice, and there isn't a lot of data out there on what makes a good choice, etc. I mean, it's with good reason, of course, that they are finding this difficult. When we did the first integration a long time ago, over a year ago with the first publisher, it took 4 months to build this into their SSP, and at that time there was only one SSP, I won't say which one, but that supported passing first-party IDs. And things have changed, and with the pre-bid modules now, I mean, we see publishers enabling first-party IDs in less than a week. So I would also say, I mean, and it's free, right? So you use the pre-bid ID. So I would also say get started. I mean, don't you need to do all of this exercise? Of course, you need to figure out which ones you want to work with, etc. But some of them, like the pre-bid ones, are pretty easy to work with. So I would also say they shouldn't wait too long. They should also start experimenting.
Amazing, and it's nice. I mean, it's clear that this is a work in progress. We need collaboration, but we need buy-in now to find these solutions. But I'm curious to hear what advice you're all giving to clients and partners today when it comes to this new era we're entering into. So, Carlotta, can I come to you with this question? Yeah,
of course. So obviously, this is a topic that affects pretty much all actors in the industry. So we need to find a solution that works for everyone. So first, I advise my clients to think about both quality and scale. And I know Jamie hinted at it as well before. So scale will be in the forefront of priorities for everybody involved. So perhaps it's a question of looking at first-party data for that quality, authenticated, registration-based ID that might not have the same scale that third-party cookies had in the first place. However, the value is higher because it's connected to real registered people. And to deliver on the reach scale aspect of it, the industry has also invested a lot in a great variety of cookieless solutions like Context that can help both sell side and buy side in this quest of prospecting. And secondly, I would probably advise clients to extend a bit their thoughts beyond all the data sources that are available nowadays, including not only cookies, but also, we talked about registration-based IDs, walled gardens, CTV, OTT, and, all the data that first-party data new integrations will, are going to emerge in the future. So really find the right mix for their campaigns.
Thank you very much, Carlotta. Jacob, what sort of advice are you giving to your clients or partners today as well? Is it similar to what you said earlier?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for publishers, obviously, it's getting started, and this is not just about the future on Chrome. I mean, we see and we hear from publishers they get a lot more revenue on Safari traffic when they enable first-party IDs. We can see that our campaigns spend around 3.5 times more on those publishers that pass the IDs, because when there suddenly is an ID, the algorithms works a lot better, and the click-through rates are about twice as high when that ID is there. So it's just obvious that it pays off for them. So I think it's pretty clear what the publishers should do. When it comes to advertisers and agencies, I would say the world a year from now, when we don't have third-party cookies on Chrome, it's a very different world. I mean, even though with first-party IDs you can do frequency capping, it's different. I mean, they live a lot longer than the 7 to 10 days that a cookie lives. So you're in a different world. It's different data you have. It's only first-party data from publishers. So I mean, they have to start testing and learning now how to behave in that world. You can't do that, you know, in December, then just switch over, you know, within a month or two. It's something that takes time to learn. So I mean, obviously, the advice is start out, you know, where you can learn, you know, what you can do on Safari today, and then you're better prepared for the future.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Very good advice, Jamie.
Yeah, so the question is advice that we would give to brands, or okay. So there's two parts. The first piece of advice is start preparing now. And by that, I mean, start evaluating and doing the due diligence right now on which types of IDs are right for you in your given regions of operations, particularly if you're active in multiple global regions. Then the second thing is we've talked about supply being an issue and some publishers still playing the waiting game. If you have identified IDs that you know solve your brand's needs in your region, approach the publisher directly and have a conversation with them. And if you have already decided that you want to work with a particular ID, tell your top publishers that you want to do this and encourage them to make that integration. We need that to happen in order to drive supply. And this is particularly important in regions which have less availability.
Well, this is it, you know, cookies were everywhere. ID solutions aren't necessarily going to be everywhere, you know, initially. So that is critical. I mean, Carlotta, you mentioned contextual solutions. So let's have a look at contextual and kind of what developments are we seeing in this space? Richard, I'm going to come to you first here with regards to contextual.
Yes, I think, you know, contextual has certainly had a bit of a revival since the news that, you know, third-party IDs were going away on Chrome. So, but I think, you know, contextual, whilst it drives huge value in terms of targeting and has done for many years in its various forms, from the most simplest of, you know, packaging up similar sites right down to semantic targeting and all the fantastic work that various companies do in the present day. It's very much based around the targeting, whereas the identifiers, that's where you're really talking about measurement and tracking, and it's kind of two different things. So yeah, whilst contextual has huge value for sure in terms of how advertisers target with their campaigns, the measurement piece and the tracking to determine how things have actually performed, or things like controlled versus exposed tests, that's where identifiers are brought in.
Thank you very much, Richard and Carlotta. I know you raised this this item of contextual earlier on. Kind of, what are we seeing in this space?
Yeah, can you hear me okay, by the way, because my internet is going okay, correct. So yeah, so with a context is not, you know, it's not a new concept. It's been around for quite some time, but there's been developments recently that's kind of elevated its most basic form based on keyword block lists, right? It's evolving. And for example, I'm thinking, you know, we're really on video content recognition as well when it comes to opening an even broader landscape of targetable inventory, right? And on top of that, I'd say that, you know, there's been some exciting developments around contextual analytics as well. Again, neither measurement or context are new concepts, but we're now marrying the two technologies, right, which are delivering new privacy-friendly data for advertisers. And I'm thinking, like, for example, we work with one of our clients and we leverage the measurement capabilities to uncover new positive contextual segments, which led to discovering new type of context that the client wouldn't have necessarily included within the initial strategy because it wasn't as obvious, but then based on data, we saw the performance was great. So the combination of these technologies really offer fertile ground, I would say, for both prospecting and conversion. So we want to encourage everyone to have these conversations with the platforms that they're working with.
Thank you very much, Carlotta. And Garrett.
So from a publisher point of view, I think I view context, page URL, page content, whatever, as just a form of publisher first-party data. And there are good contextual targeting tools in the market that we're well aware of, and they're growing in importance. But we are really focused on harnessing the power of first-party data that publishers have that haven't been able to monetize or hasn't been the center of our universe, because they don't have any control over third-party cookies. So I view context as very important, but I feel like it's just sort of a first step toward really understanding the power of data that publishers have. Not just context, but browsing history, playlist, watch list. All of these things are very, very strong signals of intent and context and desire or affinities. So I think that combining them into understandable signals for the buy side and publishers federating data or not across publishers, that's their choice, will end up creating some very powerful, targetable first-party data signals.
Thank you very much, Garrett. The next question is, again, coming on to advice, preparing for this new era, what advice would you give? And I feel, Carlotta, I'm going to come to you on this one, but we also have some really good Q&A questions coming from everyone on this call. And I might throw in a couple of others. In addition to the advice, could you offer advice around how publishers can measure revenue uplift by adding ID solutions now? And also, I think, Jamie, you covered this a little bit earlier as well, but do the new ID solutions require hard logins from users or publishers? Or are there also other alternatives for that? But kind of let's stick to the normal question, but if you could weave in some answers there, Jamie, I'm throwing you on here as well. And if anyone else wants to jump in on the additional stuff as well. But Carlotta, what advice would you give to partners in this new era?
So from a buy-side perspective, I'd say have a chat with your existing solution providers and platforms to check that the data you're getting is accurate and tailored to your needs, because the tech is out there. And on that note, specifically when it comes to cookieless context and measurement solutions, really make sure that you're thinking beyond verification. And here I'm referring to the brand safe, valid, and viewable parameters, and really drill down to the attention and engagement metrics in relation to the context you're activating, especially when going down to creative level. Because there is a wealth of context analytics data that can help inform your contextual and creative strategy. So make the best use of that.
Amazing. Thank you, Carlotta. Jamie, I know I kind of threw you under the bus with that audience question, but you kind of touched upon it earlier on. I mean, you mentioned about due diligence on IDs, but that's a good question. Do I need a login? Because not every other publisher has a login. Many want to be free at the point of entry, and sometimes a login is that barrier. Do I need a login to have a universal ID?
Right. Well, I think it relates to one of the critical things a brand needs to look at when selecting their primary ID partner. And so the answer is no. Some ID solutions work without requiring a login or an email. So if that is your primary type of first-party data, site visitors that aren't logging in and you're not capturing email, those are the types of IDs I think you should look at first. The other set of IDs are primarily based on, hashed, encrypted emails, which require a login or some other type of authentication.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Jamie. And sorry for throwing that curveball at you. Richard, you haven't got off lightly because I've got one for you. I know you wanted to talk on this topic, and you had probably got one of the best people on this panel with regards to advice to publishers. Someone asked here a really good question: how can publishers measure revenue uplift by adding ID solutions? Can they do that now? And also, what advice do you give?
Yeah, so it's a good question. In terms of advice, I think there's no magic bullet here. Publishers' main asset is their audience, and they have to focus on that and the various touch points that their audience interact with them in. So Jamie mentioned, like newsletters, emails, comment sections. these are all ways that users get value from publishers or other kind of websites. And some require authentication, some don't, but that's really for the publisher to decide, okay, these are my value adds, like to my users. How can I make sure that there's an exchange there that makes the most sense for my audience, and it's going to resonate with them? So that's the first thing. And then based on that, you look at the marketplace and figure out, okay, maybe there's 3 or 4 solutions out there which can help me with that, and then drill down from there. But really, it's about how can you ensure that it's going to drive value for you as a publisher and also the users. Yeah, in terms of testing the uplift, yes, it's obviously going to vary per solution, so I can't speak for all of them, but I think that any solution that is coming in to offer their service, I imagine is going to have a way to demonstrate the value that they're bringing. And as I did notice in the question as well, which I might just jump on as well, which is, as a publisher, would I just add all of the IDs that are available? And it's really interesting because we saw that dynamic a little bit, and with header bidding, whereby publishers added 1 or 2 header bidding tags to their website, and saw like a 30% uplift in revenue. It's like, wow. So they just start adding more and more and more. But of course, latency is an issue. I'd say, with this dynamic, there's going to be other restrictions, right? Whether it's, maybe the commercial arrangement that they have to go into with the ID company or something else. So it's a good question. There certainly is a case of more the merrier, but there's always going to be some restrictions, and it's just going to be down to the publisher to ensure that they have control of that, and they know, okay, well, reasonably I can add X number, but past that, it may start to have negative consequences in some kind of capacity.
No, that's really, really good advice. But we have, although not a lot of time, we do have a bit of a gift of time. I think Jacob and everyone earlier said, don't wait until December. Start testing now. That's a critical thing, and that's some good advice. Look, we have a little bit of time, and I do have one last question to kind of end for prediction of 12 months. But I thought before we jump onto that, do you mind, panelists, if we answer a couple more of or see if we can answer a couple more of the audience questions, and then we'll wrap up with the end one. I think we kind of covered this earlier on, and I want to pick the one saying, so many ID solutions mean more complexity for advertisers. Why is it so complicated to get a unified ID solution that can work for everyone? And I know we are all kind of aligned there, so I'd love to get your opinion. And the second part of the question is also, how should an advertiser select their solution? Is it impossible for a brand or an agency to test every partner? Who would like to take this one first? And I'm sure many of you will have some good advice here.
Yeah, maybe I can start.
I don't mind.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, so I would say there's 2 angles to look at it. I mean, of course, advertisers and agencies very often think about, the first-party data of that advertiser and what IDs should they use and how should they treat that. But I would actually say maybe that's not the place to start. I would start at looking at what can you do in terms of what you buy from publishers. And so it's not a question of you choosing an ID. It's a question of what is available out there. And what we're going to have for, in my opinion, many years will be many different solutions. There will be some publishers that are willing to share their login IDs in some hashed form where it can be understood by others. And there will be very big publishers who do not want to share that and who will be sharing some proprietary ID instead. I mean, we already see that. And there will be many publishers who do not have a login, and so they're sharing a first-party cookie ID instead. All of these things are available today, and there's multiple of them. So from an advertiser perspective, it's more about how do I use all of these and how do I start testing using all of these in my campaigns, rather than selecting one and focusing on it. Because I don't think in any platform you can choose anyway. I mean, in our platform, for example, we get tons of different IDs, and our system chooses which one makes sense. I mean, if the third-party cookie is there, we use that one. If that one is not there, then we start looking at the first-party IDs. But that's not really a choice for the advertiser. That's a choice for our system.
Thank you, Jacob. Gareth, Jamie, I know both of you.
Yeah, from the advertiser point of view, from an identifier, what they want is scale and persistence. With an authenticated ID, we've talked about those a lot today, you only get one of those things, which is persistence. The scale is probably going to be 20, 25% at best. From a publisher point of view, deciding which one to use, Jacob just mentioned that, if he gets a third-party cookie, he uses it, which that's what we should do today, because we're all trying to keep our food on the table. But figuring out how to operate in the future without them is very difficult, because if a DSP receives their own cookie in a bid request, that's the thing they're going to use to value the impression and make a bidding decision. Setting up tests without them is certainly possible, but it's a testing environment. You're not getting the right scale. So as a publisher, you're probably going to have to make a choice to use several. We're going to have an authenticated, portion of the internet. We're going to have a much larger unauthenticated portion of the internet. It's interesting. We're already hearing publishers ask the question because, like I said a minute ago, third-party cookies, they have no control. Now, in the first-party identifier, they get to make choices. They have control, and I'm already hearing publishers say, "Well, if I have an email address, should I pass it to the buy side?" And that's a decision they need to make. In certain cases, that's going to be yes, because more money comes out the other end. There are publishers who are beginning to ask the question, like, do I really want to pass on this very valuable piece of information? Because it's very difficult and expensive and time consuming for me to get users and for them to log in and for them to come back to my site. And should I pass those things? And there are certain environments, like CTV is a great example, where there virtually are no identifiers. Especially, or to the extent that, well, that's not true. There are identifiers, but the publishers, the content producers, they don't want any of those IDs or any of that information to go anywhere. They want to keep them in their environment. So ultimately, it's going to be a combination of, I think, of authenticated and unauthenticated IDs. I think you should ask yourself, in both, personally, I think that identity should be a community thing, a community asset for all of us. It should be probably open source. It should probably not be a profit center for whoever is managing it. It should be something, a common language that we're all speaking, because it's, having a better cookie pool is not how any of us, succeed in this industry. So it's publisher choice. It's realizing that you're probably going to have to support at least 2 or 3 types. And then if you turn on 20 of them in the pre-bid user ID module today, you're going to see certain results in Safari or Firefox, but it's very difficult to test today when third-party cookies still exist, and we should use them while we were preparing for their inevitable demise.
Thank you very much, Gareth. And Jamie, just again on this question is around, why is it so complicated to get a unified ID solution that can work for everyone?
Well, I think, this is the type of thing we see in a free market. It's the type of thing we see in an early stage market and in a product category that's new. You're going to see a lot of new entrants to the field. Each one of them it will take a different approach, and this allows for innovation. Now, as the category matures, we will see some convergence as the right approaches succeed. So it's to be expected, and it creates some complexity at the beginning, but ultimately it leads to a better solution.
That's great. And let's hope that better solution will solve all our problems, but time will tell. Look, I want to do one more question, because this one's quite important. I think many will be thinking this one, like, will the depletion of third-party cookies also have an impact on analytics and data tools, or is it just relevant for the programmatic advertising ecosystem? And I think, it's a fair question, because many of us are involved in the advertising ecosystem, but is it just impacting programmatic, or is it wider? And will analytics and data tools be impacted too? Is anyone okay to pick this one up?
Yeah, I can talk to that. So most web analytics systems that I'm aware of are using first-party cookies as well as third-party cookies. So of course, the third-party cookie disappears for these systems, and there will be certain functionality that they don't have anymore. For example, if you're a brand and you have, let's say your website spans multiple domains. So the user is on your website, let's say you're on British Airways. And then when you go into the web shop to sort of buy the ticket, you are then on a different domain which belongs to the web shop for some reason. The first party cookie doesn't survive from going from that domain to the other one. You can't read it. It would have to be passed, which is normally not happening. And so there will definitely be things that breaks in some cases like that, where it's multiple domains, for example. But in general, web analytics systems do use first-party cookies, and so they can still measure within your universe on that one domain. That being said, there's tons of other systems like email engines, et cetera, that are measuring through a third-party pixel, and lots of these systems will cease to work. I mean, tons of them. I mean, as a brand or in any company, you need to sort of evaluate what's going to break, I mean, the very simple way is just to look at what doesn't work on Safari today. I mean, basically that's how the future is just going to be on Chrome, right?
Thank you very much, Jacob, for picking that one up. And it isn't just limited to programmatic. You know, it doesn't. Everything's going to be impacted by this. But the Programmatic Trading Committee are also keen to share this knowledge beyond just programmatic stakeholders here. So please, everyone, download and consume the guide. Anyone else want to answer this question before I move to the last question for the wrap up? Great, lovely. We're just on time, which is rare for me. So we might have a bit more than just one sentence or two words. So to end our discussion today, I'd love to hear from all of you on your predictions for the future and how you see these paths developing in the next 12 months. Easier said than done. And Garrett, I'll come to you for the first response here.
Sure. Honest to God, I think that one of the most important things to kind of wrap your head around is we're all going to be okay. You know, the digital is still going to continue to consume everything. The things that have been happening for the last 15 years are going to continue to happen. We're going to end up with a more privacy-forward, privacy-centric internet, which I think is a great thing. It's going to focus more on publishers and end users, while still having to satisfy the needs of advertisers, which is critically important to our entire ecosystem. We're going to change the way we do things. Thinking that we're going to get exactly what we have today tomorrow is probably not the way to go about it. But that I think as an industry and an ecosystem, we know where we're going and how to get there. And Richard said something earlier with regard to collaboration. Like transparency, everyone likes to say that word, but it's actually critically important. You know, we have to talk to each other. We have to collaborate. We have to figure out how to work these new systems together. And places like Prebid and others are excellent examples of how we can do that successfully.
Thank you very much, Garrett. And I love the hope, which is really, really important. Carlotta.
Yeah, kind of on the same way, really. Like, I think it's safe to say that there isn't really a unique universal solution at the moment, but you know, it's going to require the whole industry to really step up and use more sophisticated techniques to bring the best possible solutions to market and solve what we've always been trying to solve, which really is optimize, you know, for brands, for them to make the most of their marketing dollars, publishers to have the tools to operate in a way that allows them to optimize their inventory and then ultimately give users, consumers the best possible experience when it comes to advertising. And to be fair, I think that these approaches quickly expanding to new environments like CTV, in-app gaming. And in the end, to be fair, I'm quite an optimist. And I think that there is a rich future for first-party data and cookieless solutions as well, which, you know, is an area in which I see EMEA kind of leading the way for the rest of the world.
I absolutely agree with that. And Jacob, please, your predictions for the next 12 months.
Yeah, I agree with, you know, something will definitely, I mean, things are picking pace. We can see that in, as I said, in the numbers in terms of how many first-party IDs we see. I see a lot of similarities between what's happening now and what happened in GDPR, where, in IAB and lots of other organizations, we were coming together and suddenly it was really picking pace. 6 months before, everything was on high speed. And then we all needed a break, afterwards. And I think this is exactly what's going on here. There will be a lot of traction, over the next couple of months. Publishers making decisions, ruling out IDs, etc. And I mean, a prediction for me would be that where we are at maybe like 20% now in average of first-party IDs there. I would think that we reach the third-party cookie, which I can't remember exactly what percentage it's at, but it's probably something like 60% of the bids. Where there's a third-party cookie. I think we're going to reach that in 12 months' time, and then we have, as somebody else said, right? We are in a good place.
I love the positivity from you all at the moment. Thank you, Richard. Please.
Yeah, just continuing the positivity theme. So I think just drafting off what Jamie and Garrett especially were saying, to not think too much about identifiers replacing cookies. Third-party cookie matching was not a great way of doing things. And I think, we as an ecosystem have an opportunity here to develop something much better, quite frankly. And those companies and publishers and buyers that get it right and are open-minded and have the foresight to kind of all work together on this, I think is a great prize. You can see with the rise of the walled gardens, the importance of this kind of persistent identity and what it can bring for those in that ecosystem. So there's a lot, I think, of opportunity waiting for us, and this had to happen at some point. So I'd say, taking a 12-month view or 18-month view, there'll be a rise of those prominent solutions, and I agree with whoever asked the question around, why is this kind of explosion of all these solutions? The field will narrow, I think, as Jacob said, and there will be prominent ones coming forward in each of the kind of key programmatic markets.
Thank you very much, Richard. And Jamie, closing us out.
All right. Well, to continue on the optimistic path, which I think is important because we always talk about the challenges, but to be very clear, we are moving towards a much better ecosystem. These IDs offer numerous advantages. First of all, many of them are user level. So they represent the association of one anonymous individual to multiple devices. This means that brands have much more portability with identity. They can work with multiple platforms and maintain the same identity space. They're first party. They're based on direct relationships between consumers, brands, and publishers. This makes it a lot easier for brands and publishers to respect people's privacy preferences. And then finally, once an ID scales, they're common across the supply path. So we're eliminating all that data loss that you get from the third-party based ecosystem. Those are three huge advantages. So it's really important to remember that because we always talk on the difficult parts. And then in terms of like predictions, I think, solutions here already exist, but I think a big storyline as we move towards the deprecation of cookies will be solutions that solve for the fragmentation of ID. So they could be supply side infrastructure solutions or types of solutions which combine the different types of signals or multiple IDs. So that'll be, I think, a big storyline in the next 12 months.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and thank you all for this panel. We're out of time. We're on time. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, sharing the questions. They were great, and I'm sure many benefited from the answers our panelists provided to those questions. I'll encourage you to download the IAB Europe's guide on the post third-party cookie era, and also start, as all our panelists said, start investigating the potential solutions that are out there. If you're stuck for questions as well, I'll point you towards our supply chain transparency guide as well, where we've taken some of the updates from the post-cookie era guide and put it in there. So there are some relevant questions with regards to tackling ID solutions, but also looking at contextual providers or, any other partner you are looking to work with, whether you're an advertiser, intermediary, publisher, anywhere in between there as well. So look, engage in this topic, consume as much content as you can, and try and figure out what the best solution is for you and get involved in the solutions out there in the ecosystem. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you everybody on the call, and hopefully see you soon.